Welcome to Generous Impact. My name is Amanda Brummett, and my co-host today is Lian Loop. You may remember her from episode 4. She's my friend, my co-worker, and someone that is always improving the community. She was kind enough to introduce us to our guest today. It's Corey Ladd of Camp John Marc. He is a board member and the communications chair, and he's a former chairman of the board. In this episode, you'll hear how Camp John Marc serves children, teens, and families with year-round programming and specialized camp facilities for children and teens with chronic medical and physical challenges. Well, Corey, thank you so much for being here with Lian and I today. I'd love to start out with you just telling us about yourself. Who are you personally and who are you professionally?
Yeah, sure. So I actually grew up in Dallas. I'm almost a Texas native. I moved here when I was like 3. So I've moved away a couple of times. I went away to the East Coast to go to college, and then came back to go to the University of Texas for business school. And one other time I moved away was moving to Krakow, Poland. That's actually one of my most exciting adventures. I took my family with me when kids were around 8 or 10 years old. And we had a job over there, and we spent 2 years in Krakow, Poland. So it's one of those things that's that was definitely a defining part of our lives, and just helped broaden how I look at things and how I know my kids and wife look at things too. So that was another time I moved away, and that was part of my career, which has mostly been about technology companies, leading both product management functions as well as product development in the software technology space. So had a really varied career and gotten to do a lot of fun things in that space. Like I said, I'm from a family perspective, which is one of the, if not the most important thing to me, is my family is have a wife and 2 kids, and one of my kids is in the DC area, and one of them is actually studying in London, continuing the model of doing things abroad, as you've seen, I've enjoyed as well. So.
That is amazing. That must have been incredible to live in Poland. I'm going to want to hear about that another time.
Yeah. That's a whole nother podcast. That could be a 1-hour podcast.
Well, and I feel fortunate that our family visited you there. So that was an amazing experience for us too. So thanks for living there.
Yeah, it was great. It was great having you there, Lian.
Corey, could you share with us how Camp John Marc was started and how you got involved there?
Yeah, sure. So Camp John Marc, I mean, if you think about camping in like the 70s and 80s, I mean, for me, I actually went to camp as a kid and I loved it. But it was really for able-bodied individuals. And, you know, we were starting to see camps that were for children that had either disabilities or chronic illnesses or things like that. But it was very difficult. The facilities were not made for it, and the programs are not made for it. And so there was actually a group of people really across like camping and the medical profession and just some business people in the area that recognized that need. And they just decided like, this is something we need to solve for, because there are children out there that could benefit so greatly and so profoundly from an outdoor camping experience. And so people got together, you know, there were task forces and people from different community organizations, and they pulled the money together. And then like the key piece that was missing was a piece of property and land to put it on as well. And there was a boy named John Marc, and he was 9 years old and had cancer. And he ended up passing away at the age of 9. And his parents had and still have, and are still very involved in Camp John Marc. They have a ranch out really just south of Cleburne. And they decided to donate their land to this cause. And so that's how it came about. The property was then built. There's like 14 cabins that each hold around 10 kids. There's no bunk beds. It's all single beds because you have kids in wheelchairs and things like that. But it's built with like a very whimsical facility, all the doors have engraved trees on them, and the medical building has clouds and kites and other things and cows and horses painted on the walls. So anyway, that's how it got started. And the facility was built in 1991 was the first camp. I myself got involved. It was about 4 or 5 years later. I had actually had I just had an interest in camp and had always had this kind of dream to run a camp. I was talking to a really good buddy of mine one day who's a very kind soul. And he said, "You've got to talk to Vance, who was the head of camp at the time, at Camp John Mark." And I ended up talking to him and getting involved. The friend of mine his involvement was interesting because he had kidney disease as a child and had lost one kidney, still had the other kidney, so could live a normal life. But he had been involved, and he had gotten involved with the camp that serves kids with kidney disease at Camp John Mark. And so I decided to go out there and spend a week. And that was, whatever it was, more than 25 years ago. And I've been going ever since. So I've had the opportunity. I've mostly gone every summer to that camp for kids with kidney disease, but I've also gone to a heart camp, an asthma camp, to a camp for kids with spina bifida this past summer. And even a weekend camp. I just got to do a weekend camp last weekend. So it's very fresh on my mind for kids with HIV and AIDS. And it's actually a family camp. So we do weekend camps throughout the summer, which I can tell you more about. But that's just an example. That's how I got involved. That's an example. Like that camp, when it was started back in the 90s, the camp for kids with HIV and AIDS, that was the first of its kind. You can imagine back in the 90s, it was still a disease that wasn't really well understood. And Camp John Mark won a very distinguished award from the American Camping Association for starting that camp at the time. So that's a little bit of background on camp and myself involved in camp.
That is incredible. Just blows my mind that you guys have figured out how to offer a traditional camp for kids with such serious illnesses and disabilities. Can you walk us through a little bit about what camp looks like for, say, a kid with chronic kidney disease or a child living with HIV?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are the way that camp works is it's actually there's actually summer camps all summer, and then there are weekend camps throughout the off season, if you want to call it that. So there's a total of probably about 35 or more camps throughout the year. So and each one of those camps has essentially a group of people that comes to support it. So there's the camp staff that's out there, and that's Camp John Mark staff. It's the counselors and things like that, the director of camp. And then there's this huge group of volunteers that comes with camp. So you think about so the camp for kids with kidney disease. What's really interesting about that one is they do dialysis out at camp during that week. So during that week, that is the biggest pediatric dialysis unit possibly in the country, but definitely in the Southwest in this region for that week. There are usually 10 to 12 dialysis machines and kids running on dialysis all week. So that's just an example of how what happens to make that happen is you've got doctors, you've got nurses, you've got technicians that know how to run the dialysis machine. All of those people come together, and then it's like this group of volunteers, like what I've done, which is people that go and volunteer to be in the cabin with the kids. And we take the kids out to each of their activities and help them, just navigate camp and make sure they get to their meals, to their activities, get to where they need to take meds or dialysis. And so that's what it looks like for the most part. And I can tell you more about like all the different activities and things like that if that would help.
Yeah, I'd love to know that. And also, who do you partner with? Who comes in and does the dialysis? How do you find doctors?
Yeah. It is actually, that is one of the most unique things about camp. And it's actually something that is now modeled throughout the country. And there's other camps that come to Camp John Mark for consulting on how to do this in other regions of the country. And the way it works is it's generally about a partnership between the hospitals and Camp John Mark. And then oftentimes an organization, like I'll stick with kidney disease. It's the National Kidney Foundation. And so each of them, the Kidney Foundation gets the volunteers, the Camp John Mark gets the staff to run programs like ropes courses and canoeing and things like that you actually have to have people that know what they're doing in order to, you can't just have a volunteer come in and do it safely. And then the third part is the hospitals. So you have like Children's Health and Cook Children's in Fort Worth and Scottish Rite. Those are three of the big ones, but there's also other ones. And each of them, they work. A lot of times they send almost their entire staff for the week that covers that disease because they're really trying to get as many of their kids as possible that can attend. And you can see if we're doing dialysis, it's often the most, if you want to call it, chronically ill children and kids that there's no way they could go to any other camp. No way could a kid on dialysis go to another camp in Texas. So that partnership that three-way partnership is really unique and is what makes it work from a staffing and medical perspective. And when I think about when I went to camp, there was like a camp nurse, right? And so, there's a little thing where they, could give you, an allergy pill or something. Now these kids literally take handfuls of pills at every meal. And so the nurses make sure they do that. And, and it's a very, with safety is always at the forefront of everybody's mind when we're dealing with the medical situations.
Yeah. Well, Corey, having spent the last 23 years in healthcare, my mind is blown. And I'm so impressed that you figured out how to get all those people at the table and work together. What an incredible blessing to those kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it is really an amazing partnership for sure.
How do you find the campers? How do the campers find out about you guys?
Yeah, it's mostly through the hospitals. So the hospitals, they actually, qualify the people. So like I was talking to one of the doctors recently who manages the heart camp. It's called Camp Moss. And they have to look at, which kids have had transplants, which kids are due for a transplant, which kids are actually not in a condition to be able to go to camp and which kids can. So it's a, want to call it like a qualifying process from the hospitals. And these kids literally, they are talking about camp from, September through May with their hospital, nurses and doctors. Like it's a huge topic at the hospitals every day they're visiting.
So it's a self-marketing.
Yeah, it definitely is.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And some of the camps, some of them will have in the summer, now that we're post-COVID again, some of the camps will have 140 kids. So every one of those 10 beds and 14 cabins will be filled up.
Well, camp sounds like a very well-oiled machine with all of the partners involved, and it sounds really fun for the campers too. And it sounds like they have a blast that ripples beyond their camp time.
Yeah.
So how do you think Camp John Mark is making the biggest impact?
There's when I think about it, it's kind of all about the outcomes, if you want to think of it that way. And Amanda, you're in the medical profession. It's like medical outcomes, right? There's a this was really early in my career, if you want to call it that, at Camp John Mark. There was a kid who came to camp, and it was at the kidney camp. And he was one of the kids that had to have a catheter to urinate. And so in order to go to the bathroom, he always had to have a bag, and he had to have the equipment to do it. And then he had to have a nurse, or in the case of at home, he had to have his mom do it or his dad do it. When he came to camp, and I don't know if this was the first year or second year, he was a multi-year camper, and he was in my cabin a couple of years at least. And when he came to camp, he actually learned to do that himself. And so if you think about the outcome there, is like, it's great for him because he becomes more independent. It's great for his mom, who actually had a fear of him doing it and doing it without getting infected and with, being safe and all of that. And so it frees her up, or it frees his dad up to not have to worry about that. And then from a doctor's perspective, it allows the doctor to go, okay, he's handling it himself. I know it can get done. And so there's a lot of those kinds of examples. The kids are much more consistently taking their meds during that week. So they're feeling better and they're seeing better. And, so the doctors and the hospitals actually view it as like part of their therapeutic solution for the kids. It's not just come in, get your treatment, take your pills, have a surgery. It's like, do all those things if necessary. And camp is a part of the solution and part of a good outcome. And so that's how that partnership comes into play and why it works so well.
That's incredible, being able to actually tie positive outcomes to that. I do wonder if adults got to go to camp for medication compliance and things like that. Would we do better too?
Yeah.
Well, I definitely would leading up to camp.
Yeah. It was really neat this was the first weekend I've ever gone out to camp this past weekend. The kids with AIDS and HIV. And it was a family camp, like I said. And so it was really unique getting to see the families and talking to the families about what they experience and things like that. And you just get a real appreciation for what they go through and how important camp is to them. The other, I was thinking about this too, the other outcome that I think is really interesting is like when I went to the heart camp, and this happens at multiple camps, but these kids have had so many surgeries. So they have scars from both their surgeries, but also from shunts that have been in or things like that. And particularly, so I'm in a boys' cabin, boys are running around like crazy kids with their shirts off and, pillow fights or whatever's happening. But then they'll stop and look at each other and go, wow, you have a lot of scars. You must have had a lot of surgeries. Tell me. And they start talking about their surgeries and like, yeah, I've had 25 surgeries. Oh, I've only had 12, And so, I can see your mouth open.
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, it is crazy. And I'm not kidding with those kinds of numbers. These kids, have had multiple surgeries and sometimes dozens of surgeries. So that, again, really good outcome that they are able to experience it and discuss it with their counterparts and be able to realize like, oh, I'm not the only one who's in this situation. And again, like at a traditional camp, that wouldn't happen or couldn't happen.
Yeah, totally normalizes having 25 surgeries and scars to prove it.
Right.
Yeah. So Corey, I have a question a little bit more specific to you. Right. You've got an undergrad degree in economics and psychology, which is an amazing and unique combination, plus an MBA. How has that informed your approach to nonprofit work?
Yeah. With the reason I did a economics and psychology degree was it was kind of a combination of things that I kind of knew I needed or wanted to do, which was more the economics and business side of things. And then the psychology piece was just something I really found interesting as I got into college and started experiencing some of that. So Yeah, I think it's well, like if I think about how it affected me most recently was I was the chair of Camp John Mark during COVID. So I had a 2-year stint as the chair. And so you can imagine that during that time there were big financial considerations going on. There was, there were revenue streams stopped coming in, donations were harder to get. And then there was the really human decision of what do you do about camp? How do you do it safely? Do you, send kids out to camp and take that risk? And we're talking about chronically ill kids that are immunocompromised and things like that, and a disease that didn't initially have any sort of vaccine. So, having both a psychology degree and understanding people's personalities and being able to, I've always been sort of a diplomat in how I operate things. I'm a middle child, so I'm always trying to keep people.
Me too, man.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing and a curse at different times. So it was so being able to help make those difficult decisions and being able to bring consensus, because it was difficult. We were, involving medical professionals and our accountants and the executive director and the hospitals. And so it was an extremely difficult decision, but, we ended up shutting down camp for 2 years. I mean, it was, and kids just did not get to go to camp, and it was that hurt them. Now, the beauty of Camp John Mark, kind of on the other side of that, is the staff really stepped up and created a virtual program, and it was amazing. We actually, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was like, if we normally handle 2,000 to 3,000 kids during the summer and off season, we doubled it during that time, because we had like 5,000 people that could come in during virtual camping sessions. So we had, the kids and their families, and so we actually got to help even more kids that summer. And again, that's another one that Camp John Mark won an award for from the Camping Association for starting that program. Camp is not just a place. So that's what they called it.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you were the perfect leader at that moment, even though it was very difficult. You guided the camp through huge challenges.
Yeah.
So kudos to you and your team. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Camp John Mark has welcomed thousands of campers since 1991, and I'm certain that the hope is it'll continue hosting campers for many years to come. Mm-hmm. What is the organization doing now to ensure that?
Yeah.
And knowing that, hopefully never, there'll be another pandemic, but you just never know what's coming around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things we did, and this was probably about 5 years ago, we engaged a third party, like an engineering firm, and we did a 30-year plan of what we need to do from an investment and a focus on the camp. And there were, focus on a few things like safety, the grounds, and high quality. So really focusing on just making sure that the experience of camp, which is amazing now, that it stays that way. I mean, I didn't talk about this earlier, but when you think about some of the activities, like a ropes course, there's a couple of things that's really interesting about that. One is you've got to get kids all the way from, let's say, the middle of camp in the dining hall out to the ropes course, which is across a dirt road and across a field. And then you've got the second part is you've got to get a kid in a wheelchair up the ropes course. And so this camp was built completely accessible. So if you think about how unique that is to have a ranch in the hill country in Texas that is completely accessible. There's no lips going into the showers or the bathrooms. There's no lips going into the rooms or the cabins. There are brick pathways that lead everywhere. And even where there's not brick pathways, there's good flat grass that they can go across. But everywhere is accessible. And so like that's the kind of thing that makes camp such a high quality facility. And when we looked at what we were doing for that 30-year plan, it was making sure that like everything about that the facility stays that way and gets even better. And so some of the investment is in just, wood rot and new roofs and new air conditioning. And some of it's in, I talked about the safety factor. Some of it's in, we've put a lot of like covers over an amphitheater and over the horse arena and over over at the pool. And this is one of those things that is so like, you don't realize it until you are in this situation, but a kid in a wheelchair goes to the pool and gets out of his chair and puts his wheelchair over there in the sun. And then he or she is in a wheelchair. They can, because the pool is completely accessible, they can walk on in or get down on their hands and knees and crawl on in. And it's a padded surface so they don't scratch their knees. When they come out, that wheelchair is hot and they don't have feeling in their legs. And so they can actually get burned really badly. And so putting a cover over the pool area is a great example of us trying to make sure that we are, always upping the game on what we're doing from a safety and health standpoint for those kids. And I mean, it's also done in a very beautiful, aesthetic look as well. And it's just really well done and everything that with that focus on safety being the underpinning.
I can't even imagine how the parents of these campers feel. I mean, it must be so comforting to know that you guys are taking such good care of their kids. But I'm sure that they're reluctant, maybe in some situations, to let them go. So
yeah, oh, for sure. I've talked to a lot of parents, either dropping their kids off or picking them up or talking to them after the fact, and they are as scared, if not more scared, than their kids are coming to camp for the first time. And but when their kids come home and don't stop talking about it for the next year until they can go back, they definitely understand how valuable it is. And you know what? They get a break. Those families get a week-long break too, or weekend break, and that's really important to them because they're on 24/7, most of them.
Well, that's just also very inspiring in so many ways. Lots of things about camp are inspiring.
Yeah.
But who or what organizations inspire you?
Yeah, it's interesting, like, to think about that, because what I view as the real inspiration for me is what I was just talking about. And there's two things I'll mention, but the first part is really consistent with what we've just been talking about, like those families. And I think about the families, some of the families I've met at the weekend camp, for example, they are, a lot of them are adoptive families, and they're adopting special needs children. And the commitment they make, and they've adopted more than one special needs children, and so they're like choosing to do this and to be a support for a child that needs extra help. So when you think about that, like, how can I not want to help people? So that really inspires me. The more, like, the bigger picture inspiration that I think about is, and this is because I'm a tree hugger myself. I really want to focus on a clean and healthy environment. Is like, I look at somebody like Greta Thunberg, and who's a climate activist, and I just think, like, how somebody that was, a child when they first started this, and, but believed in what she was doing and got a voice and made her voice heard. And, I'm really hopeful that voice can be amplified. And that's the kind of thing, like, as I look to other things I want to do, that's an area that I'm real interested in as well. And just seeing somebody like that inspires me, for sure.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, Corey, it's always good to talk to you. So thanks for joining us today. What if somebody wants to get more involved or learn more about Camp John Mark and in our community? Where can we go to do that?
Oh, all right. I mean, there's definitely places to help with Camp John Mark. I mean, certainly you can go to the website, campjohnmark.org and donate. One of the biggest those, the second thing is just volunteering. You know, I talked about volunteering for a week myself and volunteering for a weekend. Those are great ways to get involved. The weekends are not nearly as big a commitment as going for a whole week during the summer. So it's a good way to engage, and you're well trained, and it's easy to do. There's always a need, and frankly, there's always a need more for males than there are for females. And so I would encourage folks listening to this on that. The third thing is, I'd like to tell a little story about something. It's like one of my favorite stories from camp, if I can. That is when I was at the Camp for Kids with Kidney Disease. This was probably 15 to 20 years ago. There was a girl at camp, and she was waiting. She was doing okay, but she was waiting. She was on the transplant list, and camp is actually set up. There's a baseball or kickball field, and that's used as a helipad if there's an emergency. So I've seen helicopters come in my time there 2 or 3 times, but generally to take somebody out who was sick or injured or something like that. So that at that camp, a call came in, and she had gotten a match on her kidney. And so while she was at camp, and
wow.
So they sent a care flight to camp to pick her up and take her back to get a new kidney, which she did. And you just think like that's camp is always going to be special to her, but that's even more. I remember somebody running back to get her teddy bear from the cabin when she landed, because the helicopter is it's massive, and it was scary. But I just sat and watched that, and I was just such in awe of seeing something so positive come out of a care flight. And so I think that's my shameless plug for organ donations too. There's a lot of, again, at camp, there's hearts and there's kidneys and others that get transplants. So it's, like those are the ways that I think people can help. So, but that's gotta be one of my favorite stories. And I remember it like it was yesterday.
Terrific.
Yeah, that
and
gives
I don't consider that a shameless plug at all, organ donation.
Not one bit. Well, Lian, thank you so much for introducing us to Corey, and to use your words, making our corner of the world a little bit better, because now we know Corey and Camp John Mark.
He's amazing. Yeah.
And Corey, thank you for taking the time today to share with us about the organization and the 25 years that you've volunteered there. That, if nothing else, should be incredibly inspiring to our listeners. We just really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an honor to be a part of this, and really just appreciate y'all letting us talk about something that we believe is such a great place, and that I'm really passionate about. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. Did you all get chills from that story? I certainly did. I am blown away by the camping experience that Camp John Mark has created for these kids, especially considering the number of stakeholders that are needed to make it happen. Absolutely incredible. Well, if you'd like to learn more about this wonderful organization, find them at campjohnmark.org.